Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 1338. Hey, if you want to download this Excel workbook 1338 start file or the finished file so you can follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, this is going to be a great video. Power Query, how to take 12 cross-tabulated tables and convert them to one proper data set. Now, we have two examples. On this sheet, we have actual Excel tables. So the person has the products listed here and then the dates. And in each column are the units sold. This table is for January all the way down to December. We can see that there's a different number of columns for each table down to December down at the bottom. Now, on our second sheet over here, we have the same data, but they haven't been converted to Excel tables. Now, both of these cool tricks come from Bill Sizes at YouTube. Truly a Power Query artist and poet when it comes to awesome, efficient Power Query solutions. Now, in our first example, we're going to use Excel.currentWorkbook function. And this function will actually take all of the objects from the current workbook. Now, we have Excel tables, but we also have some other objects like defined names and print ranges that we're going to need to filter out. So if we go up to the name box and click the dropdown, we can see that all of our tables from January all the way to December have been consistently named. But right here, that is a defined name. If I click on that, we jump and see the defined name. If I select the print area, boom, that's the print area. The print range, the defined name, and all of these tables are objects that Excel.currentWorkbook will import. All right, let's see how to do this. And by the way, all of these tables are on one sheet. They could easily be on any sheet or individual sheets. All right, in 2016, Power Query is on the Data Ribbon tab. There it is, Get and Transform. In Excel 2013 or 10, you have to download it and install Power Query as a separate tab. We need to go to New Query, down to From Other Sources, and then Blank Query. It immediately opens up the query editor. The formula bar is selected, and we can type our function equals Excel.currentWorkbook. Now, Power Query functions require that you spell it correct, just like Excel, but you also have to have the correct case. When I hit Enter, it should pull in all of the objects as long as I've spelled it correctly. Now, here's all of the names here are table names, but down here, there's the defined name in our print range. Now, if we were using Excel.workbook to go outside this workbook to get objects from a different workbook, we would have something called a kind column to filter by object. But here it just gives us the name. No problem. We're going to assume that these are all tables, and we're going to use the Table.UnpivotOtherColumns functions, which will search through all of these objects to try and find a particular column. These objects down here will not have that particular column, and so they'll get an error. And then we can use our filter to filter out the errors, which will filter out the objects we don't want. Now, the very first thing I do before I add this extra column is, guess what? We come over here to Properties, and we're going to name this. Now, I named it All CT for Cross-Tabulated Tables into One, and Enter. Now, there's two things that are important about this name. The first is that's the name of the query. So if we need to come back and edit it later, that's the name of the query. But also, this name will be the name of the table when we get our final proper data set that will be loaded to Excel. Well, wait a second. If this will result in a table loaded to Excel, guess what? Excel.currentWorkbook will try and import it into our query. If we didn't take that into account, our table would always be doubled. This is called the recursion problem. So guess what? These are the table names, right? And this is going to be the name of the table that results. So we're going to very carefully copy this, and we're going to come over to the name column. The filter for this column is going to be does not equal, and there it is, does not equal, and I'm going to Control V. So it's not going to equal the name of the resultant query table. I'm going to click OK. We can see there's a step over here. Now we're ready to add our extra column to unpivot each one of these tables. Now let's go over here and look at each one of these tables. You don't want to click on the name. You want to click right in the white and check that out. There's a preview down here. Now notice the cross tab, product date. There's the product names, and here's the date. What does unpivot do? It'll take the column headers, which are, if you think of this in terms of a pivot table, that's the field we dropped here, the date field, and it gave us exactly one of each date. So unpivot will take all of these dates, roll them up into a single column, and we'll call it date. And then it will take all the individual units and put that into a third column that we'll call unit. Each one of these tables, if we get a preview, will get unpivoted. If we come down to the bottom and look here, well, that is not a table. Look at that. Neither is this one. Now notice that there are some automatically created column names, column 1, column 2. That'll become important. All right, let's add our extra column. We go to Add Column, Add Custom Column. Our new column name will be, I called it Unpivot Each Table. Now we're going to have to use a function, Table.UnpivotOtherColumns, open parentheses. Again, hopefully I spelled everything right and got the case right. Now there's 4 arguments we're going to use in this function. The first argument is, hey, which table do you want me to unpivot? Well, guess what? If I double-click Content, if you look over here, that's the name of this column. And for each record, there's a table. So that will work, comma. The second argument is the field that we do not want to unpivot. Now, if you've ever used the actual feature Unpivot Other Columns instead of typing out this function, you know that you can highlight as many columns as you want and then say Unpivot the other columns. Well, in our case, we only have one. And I'm going to put it in double quotes. It's product/date. Now, we have to put the field name in double quotes. But double quotes alone will not work, because this argument allows you to have one or more columns to not unpivot. So we actually have to put it in list syntax. List syntax is exactly like an array constant if we were over in Excel. You have to use curly brackets. So when we use curly brackets in Power Query, it says this is a list. Now for us, it's just a list that only has one item, but that argument requires that. So that's the second argument, the column to not unpivot, comma. Then we have 2 new columns. Now the first column is going to be date. So let's call it date, and we put it in double quotes. Then we type a comma. And I'm actually going to add a space after each one of these just to give us some breathing room. The second column will be called units in double quotes. Now we can close this off. So we have our 4 arguments. The first argument, what table do you want to unpivot? The second argument as a list is the column we do not want to unpivot. The fourth argument is the name with all of our dates. And the fourth argument is the name of the column that will contain our values, or in our case, units. Now I'm going to click OK. And there is our new column. Let's preview. I'm going to click in the white off to the side, not on the word table. And there's our unpivoted table. There's the column we didn't unpivot. There's the date. There's the units. If we go back and look at our cross-tabulated table, it went from this to this. And down at the bottom, look at that. There's our error. And here's the error message. It could not find the product date column. Because, of course, this didn't come in as an Excel table, so it created these column 1, column 2, column 3. It searched through those and could not find product/date. Now we can come up to the top, and we need to get rid of these errors. But notice there's no filter button. No problem. We can remove errors. Home, reduce rows, remove rows, and all the way down at the bottom we have remove errors. Or we can right-click, remove errors. Now this is the only column that has the data we want. We don't need these columns. Right-click, remove other columns. And now we can use our expand button. I'm going to click date, product, units. We want to uncheck this. We do not want the original column name as a prefix for these. Uncheck, click OK. Wow, that is amazing. Now we have a little housekeeping. That date name is fine, but that little icon ABC123 says, hey, it doesn't know what data type. So I come up to data type, the drop down, date. Come over to product/date, double click. We're going to call this product. Enter. We will add a data type, drop down, text. Units is a fine name, but we need data type, whole number. And there we go. There is our table. 3 columns, completely unpivoted, correct data types. Now we can go up to close and load. Close and load to. Now we actually don't need to check this. If I want this table to be automatically placed on a new sheet, I can just click close and load. And there we are. We can see our query over here. I'm going to come down here, double click, and call this proper data set from Excel tables. So we went from a bunch of cross-tabulated tables into our proper data set. Now, let's check this out. Here's what's so cool. If someone really liked this method of storing data, we can actually change any of the numbers in here, or we can add an extra column. I'm going to go down to the table for November. And notice it says Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Well, actually, we had at Christmas time, we sold on Saturday and Sunday. Well, watch this. I'm going to highlight those last 3 columns, use my move cursor, and move it over 2 columns. Instantly, it adds 2 new columns in the middle of our table. I'm going to call this 11/26 tab, 11/27 tab. And then I'm going to hit pause and type some numbers here. And so now these 2 columns are part of this table. But remember, this is a table object. When we imported it into our query, it's looking at the whole table. So when we go back here and refresh, these will be included. I'm going to go over to the sheet, right-click, refresh. Now over in our workbook query window, we can see now it has more rows. If I scroll down, somewhere down in the table, I found, for example, these 2 new records for the quad boomerang on the dates added. That's pretty amazing. Control Home. We have our proper data set. We can make whatever pivot table or sorting, filtering that we want. Now, in this example, remember, we had 12 Excel tables. Let's go look at a slightly different example on 12 CT tables. Oh, look at that. Our tables are not already converted to Excel tables. Now, no problem. If you wanted to, you could convert each one of these to an Excel table and then do what we just did in our first example. But this trick comes straight from Bill Sizes. Let's just convert all of the 12 tables into one single table. And then over in Power Query, we will coerce individual tables from our one large table. Now, we need to convert all of this to one table. So I'm going to click in the top cell, and I'm going to use the keyboard Control-Shift-End. End gets us to the last possible cell that we've used, which is the last column, last row in our December table. Now I'm going to use the keyboard Control-T to convert this to a table. And I want to make sure to uncheck My Table Has Headers. We're actually going to need the dates as records in our one large table. I'm going to click OK. Now you see that it gave us column 1, 2, and so on. That's fine because, again, one of the tricks we're going to need over in Power Query is a marker that says where the cross-tabulated tables start, and it will be our date. Now we have one big table. We can go up to Data and use From Table. That will import it into our query editor. Now, of course, the fundamental problem here is this is one table, this is another table. So how are we going to actually bundle up each table? Well, we're going to do a bunch of tricks, and it's going to be based on this first column that contains dates. Now, what I ultimately want to do is get that date and fill it down. Notice it's 1/1/2016. This one's 2/1/2016. So I want to fill these down. Those will be the markers for all of these records. We can use group by to group them together as a table. But first, we have to figure out how to fill this date down. In order to fill down, we're going to need nulls everywhere. So watch this. We're actually going to highlight all of the columns. I'm going to select the first column, go all the way to the end. Before I click on the last column, I'm going to hold Shift, and I'm going to convert all the data to data type text. That will help with some of our tricks. In particular, we'll have to use the date parse feature, and it will require that these are text. Now I'm going to copy this column because I need to retain that date and these numbers for our final table. So I'm going to right-click, Duplicate Column. It throws me all the way to the end. I'm actually going to double-click this and name this Date Grouper because this will be the column that helps us group all the records together. Now I can go Transform, and in the Date and Time group, there's a drop-down for Date and Parse. By the way, you can try this without having converted that to text, and it wouldn't work. And in fact, that screen tip right there tells us, returns a date value parsed from the text. All right, so we're going to click Parse. And luckily, it only got that one date. Here are some errors. Those nulls will be fine, but we need these errors to be nulls if we're going to use the fill down feature. No problem. I can change the errors to null, transform any column, replace values, replace errors, or I can come to the top of the column, right-click, replace errors. And I'm going to replace these with null. Null is sort of like an empty cell in Excel, but it's not. It's an undefined value, which says there has been nothing entered for this particular cell. I'm going to click OK. Now we have our nulls. Now we can fill the dates down. Come up to Transform any column, fill, and fill down. Or we can right-click, Fill Down. And look at that. Now we have a marker that says all of these records here belong to 1/1. We can now use the grouping feature with the columns selected. Transform or Home, we're going to find Group By. Because we had Date Grouper selected, it wants to group by that. Here, we're using Group By just to gather up the records. Many of the other videos I have done, we use Group By for an aggregate calculation. But here, we're going to name this column All Records for Table, and our operation is going to be all rows. This just gets all the rows, every single one of them. There's no column here because we're not making an aggregate calculation. When I click OK, this is going to be amazing. When I select off to the side, not right on the table, but off to the side, look at that. There is our cross-tabulated table. Now, unlike our example we did earlier in the video, however, column 1, column 2, we don't want those. We actually need to promote these headers. All right, so we're going to add an extra column just like we did earlier with an extra step to promote headers. Add column, add custom column. We're going to call this Promote Headers and Unpivot. You know, I always name everything explicitly. That's not necessary. We could have left it custom, but I like to give it a good name. Now, just like we did earlier, we're going to use Table.UnpivotOtherColumns. open parentheses. Now, of course, I am such a bad typer. Make sure that everything's spelled correctly and the right case. Hopefully that's right. All right, just like we did earlier, the first argument is going to be our table. Now, I'm going to double click this. That's the name of our grouping column. But guess what? Remember, those tables need to have the first row promoted to headers. Luckily, there's another function called Table.PromoteHeaders, open parentheses. I mean, certainly one thing great about Power Query functions is they named them kind of smartly. All right, so all we have to do is close parentheses. Now, that's the first argument of Unpivot. That'll be our crosstab table with promoted headers, comma. The second argument, as a list, and then in double quotes, our field product date. That will be the column we don't want to unpivot, comma. Then we need to name our columns date, comma, and then units, and double quote, close parentheses. Hopefully I spelled everything correctly. When I come down here and click OK, boom, there it is. We can get a preview. You've got to be kidding me. Look at that. Now, we don't need these columns here, so right-click, remove other columns. Now we can expand. I do not want to use original column prefix. Those names are fine. Click OK. Now, I'm going to scroll down here a little bit because remember we added an extra column, and there it is, column 31. That was the column that helped us group, but we need to filter that out. And if you scroll down, there's lots of column 31. So when I come up to the top, anytime we have filters, whether in Excel or Power Query or Power Pivot, anytime you select the filter to look at the list, I'm going to say load more. It gives us a unique list of items. So I'm going to uncheck 31, click OK. Now we need to do some housekeeping. Date, transform, data type date. Double click, we're going to call this product, enter. Data type text. Units, data type whole numbers. I'm going to come over here and name this all records from one Excel table. Now remember, in our first example, since we used Excel.current_workbook, we had to worry about the recursion. But here we use from table, so there is no recursion. I can simply come up to home, close and load. And actually, I want to just click this button up here because I want to send this to a new sheet. Click. And there it is. That is amazing. I'm going to come down here and name this sheet. Same thing I named the query. Now we have our proper data set, so we could do something like create a pivot table, insert pivot table, or use the keyboard Alt-N-V. I'm going to put it on this existing sheet, cell E1, click OK. Date down to rows, units down to values, design, report layout, show and tabular, right-click, number formatting, number. Use a separator, 0 decimal places, click OK. That is amazing. So we saw two examples. We went from 12 tables that were not individual Excel tables into our proper data set. And then our first example, we went from 12 Excel tables into a proper data set. All right, thanks to Bill Sizes and Power Query. We'll see you next video.